The views and opinions expressed by the following program are those of the host, guest, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station or the Webster Rock Hill Ministries, its management, or other host or underwriting sponsors. Programs presented on KWRH-LP are for educational and entertainment purposes only.
Welcome back to In Tune. This is Arnold Stricker with Ellie Wharton. Ellie, we have a very interesting guest coming on next.
We always have very interesting guests. I actually believe that you probably do have the best guest ever.
Wow.
I've been so impressed with the quality and the caliber of your guest. Just like the disclaimer says, that this is for educational and entertainment purposes. We are fulfilling both bills.
That's correct. And we are going to be doing that with our next guest. Our next guest is Anthony Gude. Anthony is an artist. He lives in Massachusetts. Welcome, Anthony, to In Tune.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Hey, pretty good.
Anthony, we are glad to have you on. As I've looked at your work over the last 18 months, and we talked yesterday about your work, and I've seen multiple kinds of murals that you've done and artwork of farm scenes. Just wanted you to give us a little bit of background about your style. And I know that you have employed the Venetian technique of oil painting, and I wanted to get into that a little bit, talk about some stylistic things, how you approach your paintings, how you approach thinking about what you want to see on the canvas. If you could get into a little bit background of that, and I'll just let you run with that.
All right. Yes, well, if viewers don't know, my grandfather was Thomas Hart Benton, and so I take his middle name as Anthony Benton Gude, where you can actually look at find my work online under www.anthonybentongude.com. So I started drawing at a very early age, and of course was encouraged in art on every level. Watching my grandfather work in the studio when I was a little boy, and so that was always an inspiration for me. And growing up, I was homeschooled and grew up in a commune, actually a hippie commune back in the 60s, which is still in existence today. I don't live in it, of course, but kind of growing up in that kind of an environment. Music and art was a very big part of our life then, so it was very greatly encouraged. And long story short, when time came to go to college, instead of taking academic courses, I went to an art college in Boston. And the rest is history. I was encouraged by my instructors to start painting as soon as I got out, and I've been at it ever since.
So when you started...
Making a home for myself. Yeah, making a home and a name for myself, actually, in the Midwest, in Kansas, where I'm still a resident, and I still have a studio and do most of my work out there.
When you started drawing as a youngster, was that something that you were encouraged from your family, or is it something that you developed when you were in the commune, or how did that happen?
I was just always drawing. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed, basically doing the best I could to draw as realistically as I could. So basically create a three-dimensional scene on a two-dimensional page. And when I started adding color and using paint, it was many years later, once I got into school. I actually took the Venetian technique, just a fancy term for starting in black and white and then adding color on top of it, and then creating your final piece through a series of glazes, it's just a process which I like to do, and I've kind of modified it over the years, but it's an old standard technique done by the Italian Renaissance painters. And the process also involves making the gesso and stretching the good canvas and all of that, which I do to ensure the longevity of my own works and make sure that they're going to be around for many, many years. And so my murals are done in the same vein, in the same way. Oils on canvas that can be created in the studio and then rolled up and installed anywhere in the world, really. Anywhere I can get an 8-foot panel through an elevator shaft or up a flight of stairs. I've done that technique in my mural work for many years now.
And that I was reading about that, the murals, and how you take them apart, and you've devised some kind of framing to make sure that when they're put up, they can stay stretched, and then you can take them down and roll them up and move them if you wanted to. Is that correct, or maybe I'm incorrect in my thinking on that?
Yeah, it is correct, and a lot of skeptics who have seen the process happen wondered if the paint might crack. I said, well, you just have to roll it up the right way with the paint side out. I said, people have been carving, art thieves have been carving canvases out of panels in museums for generations and successfully moving them around in that very, very same manner.
Now, that Venetian technique that you talked about, where you talked about a black and white, kind of a monochromatic kind of system, and then colors employed on top of that in layers. I was reading about that a little bit, that color was very, very important in the technique, and kind of it gave the canvas life. Can you illuminate, not making a play on the words there, can you illuminate that for us?
Right. I was looking at that too, and I wanted to ask that same question. How do you make it look so real?
Well, that's the key right there, and it's a good choice of words in terms of illumination, because it's really a trick of the trade, but it's the thickness of the paint as well as the layering of it that gives the light a realistic quality on a canvas, and that's always been one of my main focuses, no matter what I'm painting, is light. I feel that in the creation of light on the canvas, that really conveys the emotion of what the piece is about, and that also makes the viewer connect to the piece. It's really through the light more than the form, and so that's kind of been my style.
Also, one of the things I noticed too, that when you're when you're painting, that the clothes that the people have on are actually very form-fitting. The dresses of the women kind of hug their buttocks, and, the guys, you can see kind of a little wrinkle here or there. You make the clothing really, become the thing that stands out as well.
Well, that's, I take that from lessons of the old masters, where you should be able to feel the human form underneath the cloth or underneath the material. And so oftentimes I'd start with start with the form, start with the human form, and then add the clothes on top of it, and then work the layering in and work the folds in, so that it doesn't hide the figure, but actually you can still feel it and see that there's a living thing underneath this piece of cloth.
I like the statement you have, knowing the figure from the skeletal structure outward makes the difference between drawing what you see accurately or merely copying the form.
And that's what it looks like to me, because, and not everybody is that picture-perfect model body. You have people that, have big arms or a bigger head or, kind of big butts and things like that. And you capture all that so that it becomes very identifiable. I can look and go, yeah, I know a girl that looks like that. That's what I feel. And I actually feel the fun. I feel the action and the activity when I look at your work.
Yeah, well, it's true. And often enough, most of the characters, and especially in my murals, were drawn from life, from people I knew, unless it was a historical figure. And then, of course, I'm looking at the historical photos and things like that. But a lot of the supporting characters were people that that I knew, and just drew them from life and put them in the painting.
So talk to us about how you start your drawings, how you start your paintings. And I'm not really talking about the murals right now. That's going to be a separate conversation. But I'm talking mainly about some of the scenes that you have out in Kansas, the beautiful wheat fields, the cornfields, some of the trucks going down a lone road by themselves with a storm out in the background. Very vibrant, really gives you a sense of an impending doom that's getting ready to happen, especially if you're familiar with being out in Kansas, which I am, having lived out there for 6 years, and my wife being from Kansas, knowing that these storms all of a sudden can brew up, boom, and let it rip. How do you start that when you take the canvas? Do you sketch something out? Do you have some preliminary sketches, or do you just go right to the
I'll often sketch it out. I stretch my canvas, and basically sometimes it's the size of the canvas, which will indicate what the scene will be. and so that's a very important part of the process of putting a painting together. Is the scenery has to match the actual size. There's on smaller canvases you can do less, whereas the larger ones, they can be simple landscapes, or they have some simplicity, to the structure of them. But it's a formula, basically. The size of the canvas has to match the scene. And living in Kansas, when I moved out there, my grandfather got a farm in 1971 out there, and so I was starting to go out there and visit ever since I was 12 years old. And I always loved the place. And then when I got out of art school and went back there, it's just everywhere I looked, it was just like, oh man, I just don't know where to start painting. It was just one scene after another that I just wanted to try and capture.
It's like being in a candy store, right?
Yeah, and what's so interesting about it is, a lot of people, especially on the East Coast, view Kansas as just being big flat space. Their only idea of it was perhaps maybe driving to Denver on I-70, which is not a very pretty drive. But what's wonderful about it, and why I continue to paint out there, is the simplicity of the landscape and the simplicity of the scenery that just lends itself to any canvas, and much more than perhaps the woodland areas on the East Coast, as well as just the clutter and the detail of, you just can't get those long vistas and those deep spaces until you really cross the Missouri River, I think. Once you get past the Missouri, going across the country, things really open up.
And that's true.
No exception.
Looking at the work, it seems like less is more. There's not a lot there. You do have on the scenes, there are streams or trees or clouds or rolling hills, but you're taking in the serenity of the scene, which, when you look at something like that, it's very calming. It's to me, it's relaxing. Which, being out in the country, if you live in a city, being out in the country, you're supposed to, slow down, put your phone down, enjoy the weather, enjoy the outside, enjoy the sun, get your hands dirty and things like that. Those are some senses that are evoked when I look at your work.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I definitely like to capture that, as well as I really also enjoy the weather out there and the intensity of the storms that we get. And I think that it's just fascinating. And there's been many times where I've actually seen skies and sketched the clouds and taken pictures of them. And I would say, if I painted this, people would think that this is a fantastic landscape, that I made it up, that these clouds are just not real. And sometimes I can't do it. It's like, no, I can't paint it that way. No one will ever believe that this is real.
Do you ever take photographs of those things when you see them, or are you just relying on memory and your sketches?
Back in the day, I used to have an old Canon camera, which you took the old rolls of film, and I would take reference sketches, reference photos of different things, and then have them printed out, and I would have little booklets of my reference photos that I could look at and kind of glean ideas from, or kind of use a detail from here, a little detail from there. Now with cell phones and the cameras that they've got on them, the cell phone I have, I chose it because of the camera, and that's a wonderful tool right now that any artist is probably using. We can take many, many more pictures and use those as reference. And the difference is I could take 100 pictures and use maybe one part of one, or just a little detail from here or there. But the amount of material that I have to use for a reference is just amazing. It's great. Whereas if I was to just rely on my sketching, I could maybe make maybe 2 or 3 sketches in the same amount of time. But one of the things I continue to do, though, is I don't like the perspective of the camera lens. It's different than the eye sees, and so if I see something, I might take some pictures of it, but then I'll always make a sketch, even if it's just a very rough, quick one, as for what the eye is looking at, and the shape of things, the shape of the landscape, the perspective of the human eye rather than the lens. So that's still something I employ. It's just I'll drag my sketchbook around as well as taking pictures. And if I really see something I really like, I'll make a more detailed sketch than just a rough one. But oftentimes, looking at my sketchbooks, I won't even show anybody because the sketches are so rough.
To explain that a little bit more, expand on that, the difference between what you see in a picture and why you like the human eye. What differences, as you explained to our listeners, would you be looking at?
Well, the best example of that is oftentimes when you take a picture of, say, a landscape that has a good vista. So you're looking 20 miles or something. And if you look at that photograph, the back, your horizon line is so far away that it's in the picture that you can't even hardly see what's there. But when you're standing there and you're looking at that vista, you can see where the trees are. You can see where the tree lines end, and you can see the shape of the hills and the slopes of the valleys. And you can see that. And that information is visible to the eye, but when you take a picture of it, it becomes so small and so far away that it becomes almost invisible. And so that's one of the important aspects of why I continue to hold on to my sketchbook. And when if I look at a landscape and I said I want to paint this, I'll sketch it out and I'll draw where those tree lines are and where that information is, farther, that you can't get in a picture. And drawing machinery is the same way, like on a tractor or something. You can take photographs of the tractor and you'll have all the detail. You might think you'll have all the detail in that photograph. But when you look at it, oftentimes in the shadows or in other areas that are kind of more obscured by the light, you can't tell what's there. And if you paint that blank without actually putting the detail in it, it doesn't look right. So it may be dark, it may be obscured, but those details have to be in there, at least suggested. Otherwise, it just looks like a blank space, and that the work looks unfinished.
So it's kind of like giving the painting depth. Would that be the correct?
Yeah, it does give it depth, but it's necessary. It's actually necessary. It's a necessary aspect of it. It's kind of like one of the things. I was listening to an interview with Andrew Wyatt once, the great American painter and photographer, one of the most famous American painters. And he said, you don't have to paint every blade of grass. And I thought that was funny because he did paint every blade of grass. But anyway, it's like when you're putting in, say, a foreground and there is grass, I do paint the blades of grass. I put those in, not because I want to, but because I have to. If you don't do it, it just looks like kind of it looks blocked or unfinished, and it's just not part of, it doesn't match with the rest of the painting. And so based on the details that I've got in the background, the details have to match in the foreground. And as part of the painting process, sometimes my day is not very exciting. It's just kind of drudgery of just putting in those details.
So your paintings are the combination of the 2D picture and your 3D eye, and you get your painting from what you're drawing are all those 3D details that cannot be captured from the 2D picture that you've taken.
Correct, yes.
And that's where the real talent comes in.
Absolutely. Oh, my gosh, yes.
See, me, I'm just a 2D person. Okay. No, actually, I'm a 1D person, okay?
What?
Kind of like the one-bar rapper thing, I could only go so far with it, but then that's why I'm not an artist. Not in that regard.
But you can appreciate what Anthony does.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm one of those viewers that will stand in front of a painting and just really, like cock my eye and cock my head and look this way and look that way. I like to find the obscure parts of a painting because it does show me that artist has really dug into that particular scene or, like you said, that blade of grass. And believe it or not, a blade of grass can really be very, very interesting when it is done correctly.
Yeah, I mean, and especially living in Kansas, in a painted prairie, I mean, there's 8 or 9 different native species that just grow in those Flint Hills, and it's some of the last remaining native grasses that are still growing and still thriving. And there's like I said, 5 or 6 different species, and each one is very unique and very different in itself. And so, and I've learned the names of the grasses, but when I'm painting them, I'll often pay attention to paint that particular type of grass, whether it's the blue stem or the Indian feather grass or switch, or the softness of the side oats. There's so many, and each one of them is very different. And so, I go out of my way to paint those as well. And of course, then you have the foxtail, which is an invasive weed, but it still is interesting to look at and still has its beauty.
And I'm looking at your murals right now, and the extent to which many times, if you're just looking at it for one time, if you go to Topeka, where some of these are, or Joplin or Kansas City, and viewing them, you might not take in all of the details or all of the events that are going on. Like I just noticed now, I'm looking at the History of St. Joe, which is up in St. Joseph, Missouri, that at the end of the building on the far left side, there are 3 guys way at the end. I never noticed that, and I haven't blown this up, but many times you have to see art over and over again, or just stand there and take it all in, as Ellie was talking about, to really get exactly what you're trying to capture in the painting itself. I wanted to get into the murals. What was the first one that you did? We've got about 3 minutes till our break here, and I'd like to finish this up on the other side of the break if you have time. Is that okay, Anthony?
Sure, that's fine. It's an interesting story because my grandfather was a famous muralist, and so basically there was I painted those St. Joseph murals, the history of St. Joe for a casino. They contacted me and just assumed that because I was a Benton, that I knew how to paint murals. I'd never done anything. I'd never painted murals before. Never done anything larger than a 3 by 4 foot canvas. So I bluffed and said, yes, sure, no problem, I can do it. And I got involved with the project having really no experience and really no idea of even where to start or how to begin. And so that was those panels ended up being 5 panels, 2 of them at 24 feet long, 2 of them at 16 feet long by 6 feet high, and then another 16-footer of the Pony Express that I did. But those are the first ones, and like I said, I could describe that process and what led to it, and what led to the process that has led to my the technique I use now for all my murals.
Yeah, that would be great. We've got about a minute left here. So, folks, if you want to take a look at his work, it's Anthony Benton Gude.com. So it's AnthonyBentonGude.com. Gude is spelled Gude. So AnthonyBentonGude.com. Some unbelievable kinds of works on his murals, also on some of his artwork. Another question I have, Anthony, is about which medium you like, or which kind of paint do you like? Do you like watercolor better? Do you like oils better? I know they each have their pros and cons, but some artists, they have a favorite. But looking at your murals, man, those they're just so vibrant, especially the Kansas City Union Station one where the trains are just lined up there waiting to go out. They look like they're ready to travel. And the different towns, the Joplin scenes, the ones down in Neosho, unbelievable kinds of works. So folks, stay tuned. We're talking to Anthony Gude, artist who's very famous in his own right, but also has a very famous grandfather. So this is Arnold Stricker with Ellie Wharton of In Tune. You're listening to KWRH LP 92.9 FM, your community radio station in Webster Groves, Missouri. Welcome back to In Tune. This is Arnold Stricker with Ellie Wharton. We are having a conversation with Anthony Benton Gude, who lives in Massachusetts, has a farm out in Kansas, and does some wonderful paintings and commissioned that he's done for Topeka and Kansas City. And these murals they're not small, 6 by 16 feet, 6 by 24 feet. And you were talking in the first half hour, Anthony, about you had never done a mural before, and you took it on. And you went to St. Joe and completed those murals. Can you talk more about that process and how you get these murals, what your thoughts are when you try to put something down, are you talking to the people who you are being commissioned by? How does this all happen?
Yeah, well, well, like I was saying, I was offered the opportunity to paint these murals. They wanted the history of St. Joe, and it was going to be for a casino that they were building out there. The trouble was, there was no building. There was no walls to paint the mural on, which is traditionally how murals are generally done. Is you've got the wall space, and the artist goes to that wall and prepares the wall and then executes the mural on the wall. I had no walls to paint on. It was just a plan on paper, and they wanted these murals to be ready and be done when the building opened, which really gave me not a lot of time. It was within a year to paint all these. I mean, those are pretty big spaces, and of course, I'd never painted anything larger than a 3-foot by 4-foot canvas. And the problem of having no walls to paint on, I had to come up with a method to get the murals done and store them. And so that's how I came up with the idea of painting them on canvas, but creating a very strong but lightweight panel that was thin that the canvas could be mounted on, and then the canvas could be finished, taken off, rolled up, and that support structure underneath could also be taken apart and then reassembled and moved. So we had a 6-foot by 24-foot panel that I created with cross bracing and plywood, and kind of cut it and kind of glued it and screwed it back together. So it's thin. It's only about about 2 inches wide, and very strong with the kind of a cross brace system in the back. And so it wouldn't sag. You could hold it on either end, and it wouldn't sag at all, from the middle. And then I put a skin of 1/4-inch plywood on the top of that. So those pieces, once they were screwed down, the canvas could be laid over the top of that. I painted the mural, then popped the staples, rolled it up, disassembled the entire panel. Everything was marked like a giant puzzle, so it would go back together the exact same way. And I stored it in a warehouse until the casino was finished, and then installed the finished works, brought them in, rolled them out, reassembled the whole mural, and just basically put the hooks on the walls, and we hung it up.
That's crazy.
And
that's crazy.
Yeah, that's the system that I was using, and so it was great because it allowed me to do the murals in my studio,
right,
instead of on the site, and so I didn't have to commute and didn't have to go around. And so all these murals, because from Kansas, it's a 2-hour drive from my studio to St. Joe. At one point, my kids were in school, and I had to do some traveling back and forth from Massachusetts to Kansas anyway, and I had to be on the East Coast for a while. So I couldn't stop the painting. I had to get these murals done. I actually painted one while I was on the East Coast as well, and then shipped it back to St. Joe.
Wow.
And it worked fine. It just, boxed the whole thing back up, and it wasn't a very large box, and just went ground freight. So it wasn't even that expensive.
How do you decide what you're going to put in the mural? Like I'm looking at the one right now, Union Station. It's going to be trains.
Well, I'm looking at the one called Magic of Reading.
Yes, I see that one too.
That one is
Frankfurt.
Incredible. Yes, Frankfurt,
How do you
Kansas.
decide what to put in these?
That was a fun mural to do, and that's actually the last one that I've done to date so far. I've done about probably over a dozen of them. That one I did for was commissioned by a good friend of mine who recently passed away. She was very old, and she lived in the area all her life, and she thought that the public library there should have one of my murals, and so she commissioned me to paint it. And of course, I chose that. I'd done actually the sketches for the idea of that particular mural many years ago in a mural competition that I was not selected for a public library as well. And I thought, wouldn't it be a fun thing to do? You could include so many different animals and creatures, and you really use your imagination in a way that, like say for a historical mural, you just can't do. And so that's where that one came from. Is so that you have whales in the sky and giant squid and dinosaurs and prehistoric animals, and as well as fantastical creatures or mythical creatures as well. And so it was a lot of fun to do that.
It looks a lot of fun. As a matter of fact, just sitting here and looking at it, it takes my imagination, because you're looking at the plains of Kansas. You're looking at, like you said, dinosaurs. You're looking at mountains. You're looking at whales and porpoises underneath the ocean. You see sunflowers and chickens and just, but again, it's all this child laying on his back, her back, with her head propped up against a haystack, book bag to the side, and reading. And it's all that imagination that is just so wild and beautiful.
That was a lot of fun to do, that mural. Some of the other murals, of course, a lot of them are historical or history-based. And so the people and the imagery is based on the history of the area that was chosen to do that mural. So like the Joplin mural, that was Route 66. That mural was an interesting one. It hangs next to my one of my grandfather's murals in City Hall, called Joplin at the turn of the century. And so he did that mural towards the end of his life. And in fact, actually, as a young boy, posed for one of the figures in that mural when he painted it. And was out there. I watched him paint it and complete it in his studio in Kansas City. And so I had the honor to, create one of my own murals, which now hangs next to his, which was quite an honor.
That's neat.
That Route 66 mural, boy, that was a bear of paint. I swear it's a 14-foot mural, which is not tremendously large, but still a pretty good-sized piece of work. And because of all the detail I had to use painting those buildings, which were basically taken from the city of Joplin, I had a 14-foot mural. I think I painted the whole thing with a half-inch brush.
Oh, my. And then, the thing that's interesting about that one, as you look in the distance, you see where Joplin ends, and then it goes just basically into the prairie.
It goes not only into the prairie, but into the desert Southwest, which is, of course, what the Route 66 was famous for.
That's right.
Through Joplin, started in Chicago, went through Joplin, Missouri, and then, of course, you hear about the songs and a lot of the places it was that went, which was through New Mexico, Arizona, and then all the way into Southern California.
Right. When I was young, my parents and I traveled all the way from St. Louis to San Francisco via Route 66. And at that time, we only had the 2-lane roads, of course. So it was, so many interesting towns going, that the freeway system just doesn't allow you to see and celebrate anymore.
Right, yeah, because now it's I-40, which, just goes just a straight shot and it bypasses all the towns, and you don't get to see those things. But it's still an interesting road and an interesting trip to make. Even on I-40, I like to make that trip.
Do you like oil better than watercolor, or have a preference for one or the other, or what are your thoughts on that?
It depends on what I'm painting. I do prefer. I don't really have a preference. I love to paint in oil. I prefer oils over acrylics any day. The acrylics are I never enjoyed working with acrylic paint, but always enjoyed working with oils. And then if I'm doing a watercolor, of course, I'm using the watercolors, and I enjoy painting the water with watercolors. There's the fluidity of it kind of just lends itself. Mm-hmm. But it's a whole different process. You have to, my watercolors are considered very tight, to use the school term of what you're not supposed to be when you're painting a picture. You want to be loose. But my watercolors are extremely planned out, and each stroke is, has to be just right. And one slip, one mistake, and it goes in the trash. It just, there's no salvaging it. Whereas with oil paints, you can layer, you can cover things up, you can repaint, you can do a lot. You have a lot more freedom.
I love the one Tipton Ford train wreck, Neosho, Missouri, because it shows a dynamic of this train wreck and the memorial that was set up for it. But again, you see that on one side of the memorial are the white families. On the other side are the black families. But then you see the souls of all the people, and they are all the same. I thought that was magnificent.
Yeah. I did that mural. That was for the Methodist Church in Neosho, Missouri, which is actually my granddad's hometown, where he was from, where he was born. And that particular tragedy was very interesting because it happened at a time when, of course, southern Missouri was very segregated, as well as the whole country was very segregated. And that train wreck that took place there brought the black community and the white community together to grieve because they couldn't tell. There was this horrific train wreck with a gas engine in it, and all the people that were consumed in the fire were so badly burned that they couldn't tell who was who, and so they were all buried in a mass grave together. And so the white people that were buried along with the black people, which just wasn't done in those days.
Exactly.
And so the black and white community came together in a very short time during a period of our own history, which was, of course, as we all know, very segregated. And so I was commissioned to commemorate that and to create a mural to commemorate the unity of the tragedy, not the tragedy itself. And yet I realized I couldn't. When it was proposed, one of the board members who was proposing the mural said, "We're not going to be painting a picture of a train wreck." And I had to get up and say, "Actually, that's not quite correct. I am going to be painting the train wreck." I said, "Otherwise, the story can't be told.
Right.
I have to include that.
Right.
I have to include the train. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense in terms of what the rest of the story is."
And to see the souls helping each other up, hand in hand, that type of thing, again, really portrays the very difference of the culture at that time. And it says a lot that, when we transition, there is no color. And I think you did a tremendous job of showing that in death, guess what? Everybody is equal.
Well, this is the thing I love about art, is that you can communicate so much visually that you really can't express in speech. And you can talk until the cows come home, but this really speaks volumes without even saying a word. And that's very, very, very good, Anthony.
Yeah, and brings us back, like you said, to the actual train wreck itself, because I wasn't familiar with that story. But the fact that in the background is this burning train, and you said that everybody on it was burned beyond recognition. Again, it's kind of sad to think that there had to be that kind of tragedy to bring both sides together.
And a story that I was not aware of and that I will look up a little bit.
Me too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
we'll check it out.
Me too.
What are a couple stories that you remember about your grandfather?
He was. He had great work ethic. He was a very, very prolific artist. Completing literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of paintings throughout his lifetime. Even at the end of his life, when I knew him, he was in his 80s. He'd get up at 5. He'd have a little breakfast and a little coffee, and he'd go up to his studio and he'd work. And he'd come back down, maybe for a little break, mid-morning, and get something to eat, maybe a little brunch or something, and he'd go back to work. And then he'd come back down kind of early afternoon, and he'd take a little rest. And then he'd go back up and he'd work until 5, and then he'd come back down and have his bourbon, have his drink at the end of the day.
What a schedule!
And that was his schedule. Yeah, he worked. He worked pretty much every day. There was and if he wasn't working on that, he was working on some of his other projects that he had going around his properties, taking care of things. But he always put that time in the studio. And when I was young, I'd like to go up there and watch him, and he was always just quietly working away. He was famous for using clay models as well. And the clay models that he made were amazing sculptures.
They are
themselves. And he would do a whole clay model of a mural that he was doing, and everything was not only sculpted in clay, but then he painted. and he'd have his color pattern all laid out on those clay models. And sadly, when he was done, because he used an oil clay, which is soft clay that doesn't harden, he would basically just ball the whole thing back up so he could reuse the clay. But the amount of work that went into those clay models was, quite extensive and quite interesting. A lot of people say, well, maybe that's why some of his figures or some of his paintings kind of look like they are made of clay, because he was actually painting them from the clay, which I agree to some extent about that. But he did it so he could light them, and then he could get the shadows that he wanted exact on what he did. And he painted these, he created these unbelievable, dioramas of the figures and the landscape. And then he painted, he get the shadows right, he gets color scheme in. And oftentimes he would do maybe a small work, and then he'd do a little bit larger of the same scene, and then maybe a final finished piece, which is even larger. So he'd have maybe 2 or 3 paintings of the same scene of different sizes before he was finished, and he got what he wanted, and did that. And so to create that many works, his work ethic was just amazing in terms of he just would just not stop. He was just constantly painting, constantly working, and a wonderful person to be around too. I enjoyed him a lot as a child. He would make us laugh and tell stories, and at the end of the day, and was also very encouraging to me in terms of my drawing and my attempt at painting even at an early age.
Anthony, I would ask you, what would you say to a youngster or a teenager who's got that art talent, who's got that drive and just that desire to draw and exhibit some work and really let out what emotion they have onto a canvas or onto a media board, or however they want to do that in whatever medium? What suggestions and what encouragement would you give them?
Well, one, I would say make sure you've got a strong family support system, because no matter who you are or what your background is, getting started is probably the hardest part, and getting established is very difficult. And so you're not going to be making a lot of money at it. Don't quit your day job, put it that way. And hopefully your mom and dad wouldn't mind you still living at home for a while, because it's a difficult business to kind of get into and be successful at. The other thing is you can't paint for a market. If you try to paint for a market, generally you'll probably fail. You really do have to paint from your heart, from your soul, what you want, how you see the world, what you want to say, and what you want, the story that you want to tell. Is you'll be more successful trying to express that than trying to express something that you think might sell or that somebody might want to buy.
Anthony, what would you say was the turning point for you? And when you kind of turn the corner from, oh boy, I need that second job, to, I'm getting there. I'm really getting where I want to be in my career. What was that turning point for you?
Well, it's still a process, and it's still ongoing. I was lucky enough that I struggled for probably about 5 years. It took a long time to even find a gallery. I finally had a gallery that picked me up in Kansas City, and I had a one-man show and sold out on my first show. So that kind of put me on the map as an artist who was definitely serious and someone who could be collected. And then with the business community also liked collecting my works, which showed that if you got the business community wanting to buy your stuff or collect your pieces, it shows a faith that they believe that these pieces will have more value, as time goes on, and which they have. But I swear, after the Great Recession, we really did lose the middle class, and the middle class used to be my bread and butter. And right now, there is no middle class that can afford art. There's no more disposable income in that regard. And so it's probably harder now than it was back in the 90s. Back in the 90s, I was painting and doing very well, selling a lot of paintings. Today, a different story. It's a lot harder to keep things going. So I'm using, basically, if I was to advise another artist, it's all about inventory. And the more you have out there, the better chances that one or more painting will sell. And so that kind of keeps things going.
Anthony Benton Gude, we appreciate you being on the show today. Folks, if you want to check his work out, please do so. It's www.anthony, A-N-T-H-O-N-Y, Benton, B-E-N-T-O-N, Gude, G-U-D-E.com, AnthonyBentonGude.com. Anthony, great talking to you. Let's do this again. I've still got a whole bunch of questions to go through, and just scratching the surface of getting to know you and your work, and you do some unbelievable work, sir, and I greatly appreciate you taking time today to talk to us.
Truly unbelievable.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care, Anthony. We'll be talking to you in the future.
Okay, thanks.
Bye now.